So, welcome to the very first Jukido Academy AMA, Ask Me Anything. Much appreciation to those who submitted questions and mostly via Facebook. We're doing this as a trial, just as an experiment in the spirit of trying new things, and we'll see how it goes. This was mostly influenced by, of course, the Reddit AMA. Truth be told, I'm not a huge user of Reddit, but I am familiar with some martial arts related AMAs that I saw there. And I thought, wait, that may not be a bad idea for us to pursue as well. And more so, I was influenced by the fact that a lot of really, really good questions that come, at least to me as a sensei, happen in post-class or pre-class or really non-class context. That isn't to say, of course, that there aren't really, really good questions during class. There are definitely good questions, and I'm speaking broadly here. But a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time in class, the questions, even the really, really good questions, tend to be more narrowly focused, as they probably understandably are, to what we're working on at that moment. So a particular question about this technique that we're doing, or how that technique would relate to this technique, about how to use a particular part of the body in a particular self-defense sequence, or whatever the case may be. But it tends to be, again, not always, but oftentimes very narrowly focused to what we're doing at that time. And a lot of really, really good questions come when, it's the email question, or it's the post-class question. It's the question that someone asks in a parking lot while we're just chatting, or at a seminar over lunch. And so sometimes people ask really good questions when they're not in class. And so we thought why not use this online medium to give it a go. Give it an experimental run. People are online using these things anyway, and so why not use the momentum of the situation and see if we can't help create an educational resource that's fun and different for our students and anyone who's interested. And so, thank you to the students who submitted questions. Thank you to anybody watching or listening, those who are within our association or just more broadly in the general martial arts community that may be interested in our approach. We appreciate any support, big or small, that you've supplied. And maybe if this is successful, we'll do other future AMA sessions together. So with that said, I've printed out some of the questions here. Some of them were a little bit, there were kind of repeat questions, but we'll give it a go here. We'll give it a go. So the first question I have here is from Master Mike Stevenson asking, are you going to attend the first annual Utah seminar in January 2020? And so Master Stevenson, first of all, I appreciate you participating. I definitely had in mind probably students of the art and the association and others who may be a little less experienced. So having you ask a question is definitely a nice gesture, even though it's a little bit of arm twisting. Listen, the honest answer is that I am very, very interested in attending the Utah seminar in 2020. But at the same time, I don't want to promise something and then have to go back on my word. And so that is something that I'm not willing to do. So at this point, all I can say is that I am very, very interested in attending. I would love to return the favor that you and your family gave to me and our dojo by attending, and you guys contributed massively to our last December seminar in 2018. And so at some point, I would like to return the favor and help in any way that I can, provide something big or small, whatever I can provide to the students of Utah and whoever else makes it to the seminar, and contribute in any way that I can. Will it be 2020? Fingers crossed, no promises. We'll see how things go, but it's definitely something I'm strongly considering and looking at. So hopefully that will suffice for now. Next question, we have a two-part question from Sensei Temple Warwick. So let's see here. The first part is, What techniques, throws, or whatever else did you struggle with most in your early years? What techniques, concepts, etc. challenge you now? Are they the same or are they different? Let me address the second part first. I think that, yeah, let's do that. So in terms of, how did you word that? Yeah, techniques, concepts, so forth, things that challenge me now. So, of course, there's always particular techniques that I'm always working on particular techniques. Frankly, my student and I, Mr. Evan Shear, always have the joke that your favorite technique is the last one that you were working on. You kind of become obsessed with that last one. We have a little bit of ADD as it comes to just hyper focus on that one thing, and until the new technique comes, and then you get hyper focused on that. So there's always a little bit of that going on. In terms of particular techniques, I would say there are a few left-sided throws for sure that are functional. They work. They can get the job done. But truth be told, they're not as smooth and as clean as I would like them to be. Certainly not in every context. Sometimes they feel good in self-defense, but formally not so great. Or maybe in randori, in movement it feels better, but in another context it doesn't feel so great. So there are definitely, there's always particular techniques that are challenging. If I absolutely had to say, I'd say there's probably a few left-sided throwing techniques that, again, I don't know that they're horrendous, but certainly have room for lots of growth and development. I think the bigger thing in terms of concepts, I think that's actually, Mr. Warwick, where I am mostly focused, is on the conceptual level, or the kind of bigger picture themes. I give you two, for example, that I spend a lot of time, and over the last several years have spent a lot of time thinking about. Is, for example, one is the idea of transition, the flow between two techniques. So not necessarily the techniques themselves, although of course that's always important, but the time that is the bridge, or the movement that is the bridge between two more concrete techniques. So that maybe slightly more abstract thing in the middle. An easy example, just for clarity's sake, would be, let's say you have a throwing technique, and then you have a follow-up technique on the ground. And so you have the standing technique, and that part is pretty well defined. Let's say it's tomoe-nage, right? Sacrifice throw. You have a tomoe-nage, circling throw, and then you have a technique on the ground. Let's say you're in tate shiho gatami, or top position, what's commonly called these days the mount position, and you're going to apply an arm lock or a choke from that position. And so you have the standing portion of the technique, which deserves technical attention, the tomoe-nage, the throw itself, and then you have the groundwork, let's say the osai komi, or the control, the positional control itself, and then the follow-up arm lock. But the transition between the two, so let's say you do the tomoe-nage, and then you follow up and roll on them, and then take the top position, and then take the arm lock, or the jujijime, the choking technique, or whatever it is that you're going to do. Smoothing out those transitionary times is something that I focus on a lot. Or let's say even between two throwing techniques. Let's say you're going to do ouchigari, and you're going to link it to a taiotoshi. So you have the taiotoshi, and then you have the ouchigari. And of course, again, the individual techniques there needs to be a certain quality of technique. Or they could have a really, really good taiotoshi and a really, really good ouchigari, but yet somehow they try to do the renzoku, they try to link from one technique to the other. It's just not that smooth. It's not that clean. And so I spend a bit of time working or thinking and thinking about the transitionary time and smoothing out the bridge between the one technique and another technique, the quality of the movement and the balance and the coordination that allows you to kind of access the follow-up technique. So hopefully that idea makes sense. And I think the other big one, which is similar, they're related but not exactly the same idea, is the idea, Mr. Warwick, of root movements. And so I think that's the best way I can explain that idea, or name it. Maybe there's a better term for it. But I'll give you an example of the idea of a root movement. So a lot of students focus on individual techniques, and of course that is very, very important. Each technique, well, it's its own technique, so it deserves attention for its own merits as a technique. However, and so I'm not dismissing that. However, they're focused on moves, and I think a lot of my time spent these days is less on moves, but more on the movement, the root movement of that governs kind of as a substructure to many techniques, kind of the skeletal system, and getting really, really good at that piece. Maybe a couple of examples will work. So let's say you're thinking about hip throws, or what are broadly called Kashiwazaki, hip throwing techniques. Again, I want to be very, very clear. Each individual technique deserves attention, and it is its own individual technique. It's not some kind of hodgepodge thing. However, there is something that makes a hip throw, right? There is some substructure that makes that thing a hip throw. And if you look at your hip throws, let's say ogoshi, ipan seoinagi, morote seoinagi, sori sirikamigoshi, for example. The root movement, meaning the ashi sabaki, the foot movement, the pattern of movement into the technique, the general off-balancing of the uke forward, all that, and frankly, your ankle, knee position, the shape of your technique, the positioning of your hip, spine, and head, all of that is the fundamental movement pattern and shape of a technique. And so now, if you're doing ogoshi or ipan or morote or sori sirikamigoshi or sirikamigoshi, to some degree, it's a matter of what is my right arm doing? Because my hips, my knees, my ankles, my weight distribution, my foot movement into that throw, 80% of it, maybe more, but let's just say 80% of it is the same root movement. And so if I can master in myself and in my students that root movement and get really, 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 really proficient at the movement quality, the quality of the shape of the technique, the quality of the off-balancing of the uke forward, and now a lot of it becomes, okay, the last 20% is important. It's not that it's not important. I'm not telling you that ipan seoinagi is the same thing as morote seoinagi or ogoshi, but it kind of depends on how closely or how broadly you're looking at it. On one level, they're two different things. On another level, they're basically the same thing. They're both hip throws. And so there's times to look at them in the narrowest sense as individual techniques. And then there are other times where you have to broaden and look at the technique in a more root form. It's like looking at a car, and you can say, okay, a Lamborghini and a Honda Civic are two different things. Fine, fair enough. But on another level, they're not two different things. They're both cars. They both get you from A to B. They both have a steering wheel. They both have four wheels. They both have doors where you come in and get out. They both have a gas pedal. They both have a brake. And so, yes, you can even have a legitimate preference for one of those vehicles over another. And on one level, they are different vehicles. But on another level, at their root, they're the same thing. you know. So if I can get really, really good at the root movement, the foot movement in, the weight distribution, the hip placement and all that good stuff. Now if I can get really, 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 really good at that, then when I do get to practicing, let's say Morote or Sode Siri Kamigoshi, I can focus more on what it is that makes that throw unique and not working on the stuff that is just hip throw stuff. Hip position, leg position, weight distribution, angle of toes, angle of knees. That stuff you should already, that stuff you've kind of got to some degree, right? Nailed it down. And so you can now focus on what is it that is different, as opposed to just treating them all as their own separate thing. Maybe an example would be another Jukido, Jiu-Jitsu related example or throwing example would be a root movement would be like head down, leg up, head down, leg up, where you're pivoting at your own center and you're standing on one leg. Uchimata, haraigoshi, osotogare. Those are all examples of the head coming down and the leg coming up. And so if I can get really balanced, really coordinated, really in tune with that movement, I can then take that movement and insert it in different body positions and just practice harai or osotogari or uchimata and not have to be as worried about, can I keep my balance this way? Do I even have the coordination to get my head down and my leg up and be able to control my balance there? Of course, again, I cannot emphasize it enough. Each technique is its own technique. But if I can master the fundamental movement, it's like changing the drill bit at the end of the drill. I'll give you a striking-based example. Let's say you have Shuto Oroshi, right? And Tetsui Oroshi, so a descending Kihon waza, where you're striking with the hand, and so you're retracting and all that good stuff. 80%, maybe more, but let's just say 80% of the root movement of a Tetsui Oroshi and a Shuto Oroshi are the same movement. What's changing is the very end, right? The end of the screwdriver, or you have a different drill bit at the end of the drill. And so my thought is, and of course and there's a reason there's different drill bits, right? Different heads on the screwdriver. A Phillips head and a flat head work in two different contexts. But the way that I use a screwdriver, the root movement is basically the same. That doesn't mean that the time that I'll use a flat head or a Phillips head is irrelevant. It's very relevant. When I use the Shuto or the Tetsui or the Uchimata to the Osotogari or the Ippan to the Sode Siri Kamigoshi, those things are totally relevant. But the root movement of how using my hip, the descending arm, the retraction, when I lock in, that's the root or the substrate. That's the core of that movement. And so now when I'm practicing Shuto, I can really focus on the Shuto or the Tetsui because a lot of the root movement should be there. And so I don't know if that's a lot of technical psychobabble and mumbo jumbo. It makes sense in my head that you're trying to perfect certain root movements and dynamics, and then you can change, or not change so much as fiddle with the last 20% that makes the technique uniquely its own technique. But if I have the core 80% down, then I can change my hand from Shuto to Tetsui, or I can change my arm from around the waist to underneath the arm, underhooking the arm, and let's say a hip throw. And that change of the right arm is my technique, because I know how to do a hip throw, regardless of where my right arm is, whether it's an orthodox position like Morote Seiyonagi or Siri Kamigoshi, or it's some unorthodox position around the head, or maybe grabbing the belt, or maybe just the skirt of the gi. If I know how to do a hip throw, I just know how to do a hip throw, period. My ability to access the root movement allows me to do the canonical techniques, but also allows me to improvise in a way that I wouldn't be able to improvise if I was just locked down by, all I got for hip throws was a canonical ogoshi, a canonical ippon, a canonical murote seoinagi, and if my right arm or right grip, my right kumi kata is in some other position, I don't know what to do because it doesn't fit the mold exactly. And so hopefully that makes sense, Mr. Warwick. I know that was a bit long-winded and so forth, but yes, so there you go. Hopefully that made some degree of sense to you. Yet a second question, which was more general to martial arts and definitely a broad question. What are some of the things you think have been the biggest boon to martial arts in general, and what are some of the things that have negatively impacted it? Great question. I think that the things that have been the biggest boons for martial arts and the things that have negatively impacted it have actually been basically the same things. Like most things, it's a double-edged sword. For example, the influence of, let's say, Bruce Lee and Kung Fu movies and, the Karate Kid movies in the 80s and, now, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or whatever it is. Those things have undoubtedly brought thousands, probably millions of people into martial arts practice. They've inspired people or children to, they want to be a ninja, so they get into a dojo and eventually they fall in love with it, the authentic martial arts. Bruce Lee and his movies and, Chuck Norris and the rest of them who have brought in, tons and tons of people. These days, mixed martial arts competitions are bringing in tons of people, particularly young men, into the martial arts world, and there are more people practicing martial arts as a result of these things than there would be otherwise. And it's probably created many, many, many amazing martial artists as a result. And so I think these things have been great. Sport, martial arts as taught as sport, the history of martial arts, even traditional martial arts, is you see history repeat itself. You see classical Kodokan Judo in many forms become Olympic Judo that we know today. And despite the fact that they're both termed Judo, they're not exactly the same thing. People, many people have been attracted to this sport of Judo or Taekwondo, which, or Karate, that were self-defense oriented systems. The sport aspect has brought so many people into the martial arts world. And so it's been a big boon in terms of popularity and popular culture. Everybody, knows what karate is, but when Shihan Arel began, karate was some kind of mystical thing. People didn't understand it. So they've been hugely influential. But by the same token, although the sport or movies or cartoon, Ninja Turtles, Kung Fu Panda, Karate Kid, whatever, have brought untold number of people into the martial arts world, those very same things have often resulted in a cartoon version of martial arts. Musical kata. Everybody knows the McDojos that are essentially daycare martial arts centers, or what I call Chuck E. Cheese martial arts. You have mixed martial arts competitions that are not always, of course, but many places kind of are feeding the desires of young men to be competitive and strong and dangerous without the counterbalance of the Budo values, such as our codes of Bushido, and the decorum that comes in a traditional martial arts dojo that is meant to temper and even out and create a balance between, yes, on the one hand, someone who is physically capable and dangerous, but on the other hand, someone who is responsible with the use of the martial arts. And in a lot of corners, you have martial arts gyms that are basically who is the toughest guy in the room. Everyone in the room is trying to be the alpha dog. That is the nature of competition. If I'm trying to create a competition team to go out and win medals, it's like tryouts for the football team. I'm going to conduct tryouts, and the cream of the crop stays, and those are the people that I'm going to give my attention to, because they're the best athletes, the toughest people, and hopefully they'll be a successful team for us, and they'll bring in gold medals and the rest of it. But martial arts is supposed to be about the weaker one, about the nerdy kid who is not the athlete, who is not going to be at the cream of the crop. He's not going to be selected for the football team, and turning him into an individual that is physically capable. So I think that I think the very same things, Mr. Warwick, have been both a thing that have made martial arts in the general sense grow in terms of popularity, common knowledge in popular culture, and just martial arts kind of being something that everybody knows about. The very same things that have created, I guess, that positive effect, to the extent that it is positive. You and I may not be in martial arts. We may not have been attracted without these things. I certainly know that I was into, kung fu theater and all that good stuff when I was a kid. But at the same time, if it just stays there, or we cater to that, then you never really get to the heart of martial arts to begin with. And so, ironically, I think as martial arts have grown in number and in popularity, the ability to get at the authentic heart of martial arts is much smaller. I suspect that if you were training in martial arts in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were a lot fewer people teaching martial arts, a lot fewer. It was a much more exclusive club, and a lot less was known about it in terms of popular culture. But I think your chances of being in a good dojo back then were much higher than they are now. So smaller numbers overall, but higher quality in terms of the proportion of number of dojos to number of quality dojos. I think it was much closer. Chances are that if you went to a dojo in the 1930s or 40s, I'm sure there were goons back then too, but I think the chances were much better that you went into a quality dojo, because there just weren't that many people teaching to begin with. And these days, we can think of it like McDonald's. The fact that McDonald's is on one hand successful, they're $1 billion business, and they, are on every continent minus Antarctica, maybe even there, I don't know. They're everywhere. By any commercial standard, they're successful. But yet the quality of the food, everybody knows what the quality of the food is. That's the irony. It's that you have pretty crappy food, but it's quick and it's easy. And I think martial arts is something like that. The quick, easy approach is, quick and easy to find. It's everywhere. But getting a quality martial arts education is not so easy to find these days. So hopefully that answers that question. Moving on, let's see here. Sean Michael asks, how did Russia become so infatuated with judo? Was it due to World War II? That's a good question. So to my understanding, and this is kind of an abbreviated version of this, Sean, is so there was a Russian individual whose name escapes me. I know his initials are VO. But for whatever reason, his full name isn't coming to me. But anyway, he was a Russian who trained at the Kodokan and actually under Jigoro Kano, and he was, to my understanding, the first person not only promoted to black belt level but to second degree black belt under Jigoro Kano, and he went back from Japan to Russia and started teaching judo there. And teaching at military and so forth. How between Russia and Japan was not a good one, and so he was thought to be a spy and so forth, and they actually executed him. And he was one of the founders of Sambo, and Sambo, for all intents and purposes, is basically judo under a different rule set and kind of judo with an attitude. It's fitting the Russian culture. And anyway, so they changed some of the rules. Some of the points are different, and they called it sambo. They supposedly infused it with different elements of wrestling and so forth. And so that became kind of the de facto. Sambo is something like self-defense without weapons. It's an abbreviation from Russian and Russian. And so Sambo became pretty popular. They didn't want to call it judo. They changed the rules. They called it something else, and were teaching it to the military, and eventually became a sport in its own right. And anyway, when the Olympics came along and the Soviets were obviously trying to establish themselves on the world stage, because Sambo and Judo were basically two different flavors of the same thing. You know, one may be chocolate and one may be vanilla, but they're both ice cream. So Sambo was not an Olympic sport, and so the Soviets decided to take their Sambo players and create a Soviet judo team for the Olympics. And the Soviet countries did very, very, very well in those early stages. They had very unorthodox grips. That was not the conventional formal grip of the sleeve and the lapel that is typical of classical Kodokan Judo that was popular at the time. And they had a lot of pickup techniques, teguruma, kataguruma, belt grips, what is often called the Georgian grip, where they reach over the back and grab the belt. And they had a lot of unorthodox grips, and they did very, very, very well. And so it brought a lot of prestige. You know, you had the Russians, or at that time the Soviets, you know, compete in the Olympics in judo and do very, very well. I think they even got bronze, but you know, don't quote me on that. The details are sketchy in my head right now, but they did really, really well, and it brought a lot of prestige. And strangely enough, because the Soviets did so well at judo, at the Olympics at judo, then judo became really, really popular in the Soviet countries, kind of alongside sambo. And at one point, it was more in vogue to do judo than it was to do sambo. And so judo and sambo kind of grew. Sambo, until relatively recently, was pretty isolated to Soviet or former Soviet republics and Russia, of course. But judo became very, very popular in Russia as a result. Interesting note, there is Kashiwazaki Sensei, who was an amazing judoka, still alive in his 60s or 70s, kind of returned the favor. He was a world champion judoka who went to Russia, competed in sambo, having never competed under the rule set before, and won a sambo world championship in his weight class. So the Russians the sambo guys went over to the judo world and competed under that rule set and did really well. And of course, everyone else eventually adapted. And then the Japanese under Kashiwazaki Sensei and another gentleman as well from the Kodokan went to Russia, competed in sambo, and won a sambo world championship, even though they were not sambo practitioners. They just kind of adapted to the rule set. So hopefully that helps, Sean, answer that question. Moving on. Let's see here. Monica Johnson asks, are there any techniques you dislike doing or like less than others? What advice would you give students who find techniques that they may not like? Have you found a way to change that feeling of dislike into something more positive? Are there any techniques I dislike doing? This may sound like company line, but not really. I really do enjoy. I enjoy all of Jukido Jiu-Jitsu. I enjoy all of it. Now, of course, there are techniques that we gravitate towards and are really, really, really fun to practice. And so either because they're just, by the nature of them, they're very fun to practice, or they're techniques that you just naturally gravitate towards. There's always techniques that you really, really enjoy more than others. But that's different than saying liking one technique a lot, or even more than another technique, is not the same as saying I dislike that technique. So I can't really think of offhand any techniques that I really dislike doing. There are certain techniques certainly that I dislike doing with bad ukes. The value of good uke cannot be overstated. and particular techniques. There are certain foot techniques, ashiwaza, harai seri kamiyashi, sase seri kamiyashi, and other techniques where, if you're just going to stand there in a formal position and practice them, and your uke doesn't know what it means to be a good uke, they're not the funnest to practice. But that's not the technique. That's more the, how the technique is being practiced with a particular partner. So no, there aren't really techniques that I dislike. There are just applications that I like more than others. In terms of, what was the second part of that question? What advice would you give to students who find techniques that they may not like? Have you found a way to change the feeling of dislike into something more positive? Certainly along the way, training frustration with a technique, frustration with one's own performance with a technique, that's normal and natural. But for me, I think of it like a puzzle. I want to figure it out. I've said in the dojo recently, Jukido, Jiu-Jitsu, the principles are perfect. It's our ability to align ourselves with the principles that where the issue comes in. So I try to instead of marinating and I don't like this technique, this technique's no good, I try to focus much more on the problem solving component. How can I make this technique good? And once I see how the technique fits in the larger framework, how it's one piece in the larger puzzle of our self-defense system, then I don't dislike it because I see its value, and I want to make sure that it's a valuable piece. I would say to a student to keep their mind open. There are techniques that, actually getting back to Mr. Warwick's question, I don't know that I fully answered it. I know for me, for example, I always kid that Tayatoshi today is one of my all-time favorite throwing techniques. I absolutely love Tayatoshi. But I think I was maybe brown belt before, I was on talking terms with Tayatoshi. I mean, it was a mediocre at best for a very, very long time. And mediocre is probably being generous. But I worked really hard for that technique, and now it's mine. And so if I had kind of a long time ago said, Tayatoshi is not for me, or I dislike Tayatoshi, it was actually the fact that Tayatoshi was hard for me that made me want to get after it. And now it holds a special place with me because I worked so hard for it. And it's not just I can do it, but it actually legitimately is one of my favorite techniques, one of my go-to techniques. So, having the long term in mind, understanding that development in this martial art is not it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and that techniques can grow on you over time. And often it's the techniques that are most troubling that end up becoming some of your most prized possessions. Because as Shihan Arel used to say, nothing good comes easy. And so you've had to really, really work hard for those techniques. So they mean a lot to you. So keep the big picture in mind and look at it as a challenge, something to overcome and to solve. Sometimes you'll get one or two little tweaks on a technique, and all of a sudden this technique that you couldn't perform at all of a sudden it's a brand new technique. And sometimes it takes a little while to discover those or key in on those points. So hopefully that helps, Monica. Angie asks, I'd love to hear your answer to the question, how long does it take an average person to become a black belt? And then she notes, even though most of your students already know the answer. So how long does it take the average person to become a black belt? The standard answer that I always give is the average person doesn't become a black belt. Secondly, I would say it depends what you mean when you say a black belt. There's a lot of schools where you got 10 and 11-year-old black belts running around after, 2.5 years of practice. So black belt means, what is the value of a PhD if everybody's walking around with a PhD at 10 years old? A legitimate, authentic black belt, I would say most people won't earn a black belt. So the average person will not earn one. That doesn't mean when I say the average person won't earn one, I don't mean that in terms of the average Joe not being able to earn one. I've seen in our dojo people who are type 2 diabetics who've lost over 100 pounds become black belts. And so they were less than average physically. They were not the average Joe. They were subpar from the physical side. They were, you know, one of my students, you know, his first class, he couldn't do 50 jumping jacks. And, you know, 6-7 years later, he earned a black belt and had lost a considerable amount of weight, had really gotten a handle on diabetes. And I've also seen 18-year-old kids who come in and look like they're chiseled out of stone and are amazing specimens physically and super athletic, and they last 2 or 3 months. And so I think it doesn't mean you have to be an Olympic athlete physically to earn a black belt, but you do have to have or develop a certain fighting spirit in order to earn a black belt in a legitimate martial art, certainly in Jukido and certainly under this dojo. You know, I think the earliest or the shortest amount of time I've ever awarded a black belt was 4.5, 5 years. And I've got students who've been working with me 11, 12 years and are not a black belt now. And so, you know, that it is what it is. So it kind of depends on what you mean by average and what a black belt means to you. But for what a black belt means to me, the average person doesn't get one. You know, what it means to be a black belt by definition means that you're not your average person. You need something special to get one of those. Let's see, further questions. We'll do just a few more here. Along the lines of similar question in the past, Brandy asks, just for the sake of curiosity, what are your favorite techniques by type? Say your favorite hip throw or your favorite throw rather, and that can even be broken down by throw type, favorite joint lock, favorite ground technique, any other categories I'm missing out on. I'm asking more from more of an enjoyment standpoint of just loving to execute the technique, but also effectiveness. Hard question, and I love all of Jukido, and so I of course, there's always particular techniques that you enjoy, but it's hard to single it out to one technique. It's like, what's your favorite technique in a particular instance would be an easier question. You know, all things being equal, what is my favorite hip throw? Ipan Seonagi would probably be my favorite hip throw. But in a different situation, in a different context, maybe it's ukigoshi, a half hip throw, or maybe based on where my right arm is, an ogoshi. So, but all things being equal, you know, maybe it's Ipan Seonagi. But, you know, I think of techniques like pieces in a puzzle, and I like the entire puzzle. I like the complete puzzle, and I don't try to obsess too much on particular pieces of the puzzle. But I'll bite a little bit, I guess. I won't do it by category, because then I feel like I'm picking what my favorite child is, you know, trying to pick your favorite children. But a couple that come off the top of my head immediately, I love Tayatoshi. I both like it as a technique, and I love to practice Tayatoshi. Haraigoshi, I love a lot. Osotogari, I love a lot, both from an effectiveness standpoint, its practicality, but also I enjoy practicing it. Sumigeshi is a sutemiwaza sacrifice throw that I thoroughly enjoy. I think it's a very versatile, especially when you start playing with the kumikata, the gripping sequences. There's a lot of applicability, a lot of variations to sumigeshi that are very practical. In terms of choking techniques, probably kata hajime is my favorite choke, although I really, really, really like just a classical cross-collar choke, jujijime, either in the gyaku or kata variation. I really, really like jujijime, especially in mat work and newaza. If you have proper control of the uke, if you have them under your control, particularly of at least one of their arms, I like jujijime a lot. I also like kata hajime. My all-time favorite ground technique, the one that I feel very, very confident saying is my favorite ground technique, would be jujigatami. It is such a simple technique, but yet has so many, is so versatile in terms of again, the end position of a Jujigatami is a Jujigatami, but there's so many roads and paths to Jujigatami. So it's not just the technique, but all of the things that lead to Jujigatami and spawn off of let's say a failed Jujigatami, that make it one of my I've spent a lot of time crafting that technique. So I really, really, really like that technique. So I like elbow strikes a lot. I like you know, they're not the sexiest technique in the world, but it's finishing strikes. I like Tetsui and Shuto Oroshi. They blend well at the end of a throw. It's a nice, quick, clean finish. I've always liked kicking techniques a lot. I think Maigeri, in terms of effectiveness, I really, really like a strong Maigeri. But I like practicing, even if not as practical as a Maigeri, or as universally as applicable as a Maigeri. I like Mawashigeri and you know, Yushiro Mawashigeri and some of the spinning variations. They're just fun to practice, although they're not as high percentage as Maigeri. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Brandy. I think you had another question here, Brandy. Maybe not. Oh, I've been told by another Jukidoka that Shihan Arel would sketch techniques out on napkins or whatever he could get his hands on when an idea would come to him, and I was wondering if anyone has those sketches today. I'm super fascinated with how he used his skills as both a literal artist and a martial artist to bring the art to what it is today. So Kaicho Howard contributed to this before this video response, and I appreciate him doing that. As you can see, he clearly is in possession of a lot of that stuff. And Brandy, I think that Shihan was a doodler. I mean, he was an artist. He definitely was an artist, no doubt about it. And actually, our early guidebooks before the most recent version of Sankosho, the 1989 version of Sankosho, and the 1994 guidebook that was exclusive to Jukido called Jukido Jiu-Jitsu, the Realistic Ryu, that those books are largely, the techniques are done by his hand drawings. And so in some ways, all of us that have those texts have his artwork and his teaching kind of combined into one. In terms of the doodles on, you know, the legendary on the napkins or, you know, on a menu or things like that, I think probably a lot of that stuff is lost. If you know Shihan, you know, it was probably in his other briefcase or, you know, somewhere else. They're probably in some pant pocket somewhere. But to the extent that some of that stuff survives, I know that I have a piece of his artwork hanging on my wall over there, and others have more of his, I guess, official artwork. In terms of the doodles, I think a lot of them are probably here and there. But if anyone has the majority of the doodles that are known about, it would definitely be Kaicho Howard, who basically inherited a lot of you know, the official files of Shihan Arel and the organization when Shihan passed and Kaicho was elevated to the role of the president or the chairman or the Kaicho of our organization. A lot of that was passed on to him as the next head. So some of it's floating around. Some of it I'm sure is lost forever. Some of it is held in our guidebooks. But the doodly kind of stuff that I think you're mostly referring to, the stuff that does exist, I think Kaicho Howard probably has the majority of that in his files. At least that's my understanding. Let's see here. Winding down, take another 2 questions here. When and how did you know you wanted to be a sensei? Was there a specific moment when it hit you that that's what you wanted to do, or did it come gradually? From Monica. Monica, I think it's both. I think I always, since childhood, I had a vision of myself as a lifelong martial artist. I definitely thought that would be the case. And in my study of martial arts, even as a teenager, even as a young teenager, I noted very early on that, with very few exceptions, and I can't even actually think of one off the top of, and I didn't know if that was a coincidence or not, but I didn't think so, and I didn't know what the connection was then, but I kind of intuited that there was a connection, that in order to be the highest level martial artist you can be, teaching was a part of that. You had to be a teacher. And so in that sense, I always kind of envisioned myself teaching. There are two distinct moments that well, there are many moments. There was a moment, the day in April in 1999 when Shihan Arel awarded me my teaching certification. And at that point, I became the youngest Jukido Jiu-Jitsu sensei at that time and ever awarded instructor certification. And I knew that I was going to be moving to Florida in not too long. My mother actually tells this story much better than I do, but Shihan was basically, saying a few words about in the moments leading up to him awarding me the certificate. And I apparently did not have the confidence that he had in me, but he was saying that basically I was going to be moving to Florida and that I was going to try my best to establish a dojo. But as he was saying it, he actually cut himself off and said, he's not going to try, he's going to do it. I know he's going to do it. And that hit me really hard, that here he was, not only my sensei, but the Shihan, and someone that there are not enough words to express how much respect I had for him. That he had that much confidence in me was quite heavy. And so I felt obligated, in the best sense of the word, obligated to him and to this art, to do everything that I could to not only be a sensei, but to do everything that I could and not do it in a half-hearted way. But if I was going to do it, that it was going to be worth doing and doing my best the way that he taught us. And so, well, at that moment, I became an instructor. He gave me instructor certification, and I knew then that in my view, being a sensei, awarded sensei-ship from Shihan Arel was not something that I took lightly, and that I was going to do the very, very, very best I could, despite my age, despite the distance, to do something unique and special that honored him and honored his art to the best of my ability. Another moment that hit me really, really hard, Monica, I was already a sensei for several years then, was when I signed the lease for the first storefront dojo, when we weren't teaching out of aerobics rooms or rec departments anymore, but I signed the lease for our space. And I basically quit my regular job and decided that something had to give. And I was playing with the idea of trying to run the dojo full-time as my full-time profession, something that I actually never thought would happen. That was not the model that I had seen. And most people that were teaching martial arts full-time were of the McDojo type. The only person I knew personally that was teaching martial arts full-time for a living was Shihan Arel. And I remember I called him and I asked him his opinion, and he told me, just go for it, give it a shot. And although he didn't say, you only live once, that was kind of the feeling that I got. And so I put all my eggs in that basket. I put myself in a situation where it was sink or swim, and I stopped working for the school system, and I started working exclusively full-time, every waking moment dedicated to the development of our dojo and the development of our art and my students and my own abilities as a martial artist and as a teacher. And as soon as although I was very nervous when I signed that lease, when I did it, I felt like there was no going back. That although I was already a sensei at that moment when I signed that lease, that there was no retirement from this for me. That I'd be doing this until my last day on this plane. So that was a kind of it was not just something I was going to do along with other aspects of my life. That it would be a dominant theme for my entire life, was to be a teacher of this art. So hopefully that helps, Monica. Last but not least, Terry asks, okay, as a parent of a Jukido student and as a student myself, I sometimes find it hard to deliver the message to my son that it is okay for him to defend himself whenever necessary. The reason for this is that the message he is receiving in school is to not defend himself, but to tell a teacher or to try to be the friend of the bully instead of fighting them. As a martial artist, I know this is crazy talk, but as a parent, I do not want to send the wrong message to my child that he should not ever listen to his teachers or counselors. What would be a good way to let him know that it is okay for him to defend himself, but to also respect the opinions of his teachers and counselors? Terry, I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. As a parent and as a teacher, I get it. I think that we can tell him both things. And that's what I tell our students. And you've heard me say this before. On the one hand, it is, I believe to my bone marrow, that nobody, no policy, no law, no one can take away your natural right to self-preservation, your ability to protect yourself from physical harm and to protect your physical autonomy. No policy, no law, nobody takes that away from you. And I think as a parent, the most powerful thing that we can do, and as adults and mentors, the most powerful thing we can do is to let our children know that this is the case. You do not need permission to defend yourself. And if you do, I'm giving it to you. In fact, not only do you have permission to defend yourself, it is your responsibility to defend yourself. Now, we do have to make it clear. I'm not talking about fighting. You don't have a responsibility and an obligation to get into fights recklessly because someone said, hey, I don't like your ponytail and your large forehead and big nose. That may annoy you. That may frustrate you. That may hurt your feelings. That doesn't give you the right to go over there and give them an elbow across the head or throw them in an uchimata. You may feel like you want to, but it doesn't give you the right to. But you absolutely do have the right to protect yourself if someone is physically trying to harm you. It would be absolutely ludicrous if we had a woman in a parking lot putting groceries in her car and some guy grabbed her from behind and tried to pull her into a van or sexually assault her, for us to say to her, well, just try to be his friend. Don't fight the mugger or the rapist. Just ignore the rapist. In any other context, that's ludicrous. Someone breaks into your home at 3 a.m. You don't try to befriend that person. If you need to use deadly force to stop that person, then nobody's happy about that, but you do what you have to do. That's different than saying go out and look, be Batman, be a vigilante, and go catch criminals and shoot them. No, we're not saying to do that. But if someone comes into your house at 3 a.m, you don't have to ask anyone permission. You don't have to call 911 first and ask permission to defend your family from harm. And so, although the scaling may be different, it's a difference of scale, but the situation is the same. If someone is physically trying to harm you and you are in physical danger, as your parent, I am telling you, you have the right to defend yourself. This is very, very important that we tell our children. But of course, we have to also make it what we mean by self-defense very, very, very clear. That this is not someone making fun of your clothes. This is not someone, teasing you. That there are different self-defense strategies for that don't have to be physical. In terms of, respecting teachers and counselors, we have to tell children that, listen, we have to respect the opinions of others, and we're going to respect the rules and policies to the fullest extent that we can. But if someone is physically trying to harm us, we have the right to protect ourselves no matter what. And if that means that you get in trouble with school, so be it. We'll buy you an ice cream the day that you're off from school because you defended yourself. We'll go to Disney World, whatever it is. As one of our other parents commented on this thread, Mr. William Jenkins, rightfully said, I'd rather get a call from my parent, as a parent, I'd rather get a call from my kid's school telling me that they're going to be off from school for 2 or 3 days because they defended themselves, as opposed to, and I've had parents tell me this before, they get the call telling me that the kid got beat up on the school bus, or a call from the ER saying that, the kid is in the hospital because they didn't defend themselves because they were afraid of defending themselves and let some kid beat them up. That's simply not acceptable. And no school policy, no law, nobody defend yourself. But, of course, we understand, although we may not always agree with the words used and the messaging. Listen, I get it. When you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of kids inside of a school, you have to be very, very careful with the messages. And the message that they're trying to beat home to the kids is, hey, kids, let's avoid physical confrontations. Let's avoid violence, if at all possible. Let's, when it is necessary to ignore the bully, and if it's possible to ignore the bully, to the extent that you can, you got to let some stuff slide. And that's not always wrong, but it's too much of a blanket statement. You can't ignore the bully when the bully is holding you by the throat and punching you in the face. You can't ignore them then. That's not the right time to be their friend. And you're not helping the bully, by the way, strangely enough. By you just broke my nose and removed 3 of my teeth, and at the same time I'm asking you to be my friend. Is that what we want to teach people, that you can treat people any way you want and they're still going to try to befriend you? I don't think it's good for the long-term mental health of the bully either. I'd rather be the 10-year-old kid who's a bully and some kid cleans my clock at 10 years old and I realize, oh, maybe I'm not as tough as I thought I was and I should probably keep my hands to myself, than be an 18-year-old kid who's gotten away with it for a long time and now it's a road rage incident where maybe firearms are involved. So I think it's a delicate balance. I think that we have to teach them to respect others. I think we need to teach them to be able to distinguish between self-defense and fighting for the sake of fighting. But I think we can use everyday examples. If a murderer is going around town or a bank robber is going around town, the police officer is going to stop that person. And they'll try to use their words first, and they'll try to get compliance first. But if that bank robber starts shooting at the police officer doesn't try to convince them to be the friend. The police officer is going to stop that from happening. And they're going to defend themselves, as they should. And so in any other context, if it's a woman being raped, if it's a police officer being shot at, if it's you at 3 o'clock in the morning in your own home and someone breaks in, you have the right to defend yourself. And there's a justifiable use of force. Shihan Arel always emphasized the appropriate use of force. There is a point where you may be going too far. But, as we tell the kids all the time, Jukido is not about learning how to hurt people. It's about learning how not to get hurt. When someone, again, not to beat this horse to death or be a broken record, but if someone breaks into my home at 3 in the morning and I shoot them, it's not because I'm looking to kill someone. I'm not looking to kill anybody. I'd prefer not to have to pull my weapon. I'd rather never have to be in that situation to begin with. But if I am in that situation, I have to give myself permission to do what needs to be done to protect my family. I'm gonna shoot that individual. I'm gonna make that call. I'm speaking about me personally. Does that mean I'm trying to kill that person? I'm not trying to kill anybody. What I'm trying to do is defend my family and protect our safety. And whatever happens as a result happens. I'm not looking to kill anybody. If someone dies in the process, that's sad. It's unfortunate. But I didn't put myself in that position. They put themselves in that position. And, if someone is grabbing a kid and pushing them up against the locker and slapping them across the face, and the kid ends up defending himself and giving the other kid a black eye, listen, they were in a position where they had no choice. No reasonable person would think it's okay to just sit there and just get, brain trauma, teeth removed from your face, black eyes, and not defend yourself. And by the way, at the end of the day, many school policies are 0 tolerance. So both kids get suspended anyway because there was a physical confrontation. So what's the incentive to not defend yourself? So I think, again, in terms of being clear with children, let them know that they have permission to defend themselves, but they really better make sure that they're defending themselves and it's not just blind anger or frustration. If they have to protect themselves, though, they not only have the right but the responsibility to do so. Let me see. We've gone on long enough for a first trial run. I think that is the bulk of the questions. And so if you enjoyed this, give us the thumbs up or comment. Let us know what you thought about all this. If you'd like to see another one, by all means, feel free to let us know. I try to be relatively thorough with the answering of the questions, as opposed to give, what's the point of having an Ask Me Anything question and answer session if you're going to give 10-second response to everything, but hopefully it wasn't too excessive. And all of you got your questions answered. If you'd like to do one of these again, by all means, let me know. You can let us know in the comments, both here and on YouTube. And if you have any other questions, pile them up. And when we collect enough questions, maybe we'll do another one again. And I appreciate your interest. No matter whether we do another one of these again, I appreciate you submitting questions or even just watching this experiment with the Ask Me Anything session. And more than anything, I appreciate your loyalty and support, not only to our dojo, but to our martial art and our approach to martial arts. And I appreciate each and every one of you very, very much. Have a great day.